just because you buy a game doesn't necessarily mean you actually own it. This is a concept that's been around for a while, and has been a topic of debate for quite a long time. But since the Switch 2 came out, it's sort of been reinvigorated, and a lot of that comes down to Nintendo's game keycards. This is a form of physical Switch game distribution, where the game is not actually on the cartridge. More or less, that cartridge is just a download key to allow you to download the game from Nintendo's servers, and people are understandably upset about this. One of the cool things about the Switch is that it was sort of the last bastion of this idea where you could buy a game on a physical cartridge, the entire game would be on that cartridge, you could put it into your system, and it wouldn't even need to install. The game just ran off of that cartridge. It was sort of this last vestige of the good old days of the NES and the Super Nintendo and the N64 and the Sega Genesis. But now with the Switch 2, a lot of people are kind of concerned that that's going away. And that's fair. But beside that is this other conversation about ownership. If the game isn't on the cartridge, does buying physical still get you the benefit of truly owning your game, or is it no different than when you buy a digital game and more or less indefinitely rent a game? So let's talk about it. Now, to be totally clear, the concept of the game keycard isn't new. It's something that both Sony and Microsoft had already been doing. Most of the time when you buy an Xbox or a PlayStation game, maybe a little bit of the game is on the disc, maybe none of it is on the disc. So this is by no means new. And even on the Switch, you had plenty of games where you needed to download most of the game. For example, the Spyro trilogy had the first world of each game on the cartridge, and then the rest of the game needed to download. So if you just put Spyro into your Switch, you couldn't actually play through even one of those 3 games. But I think what people are reacting to on the Switch 2 is this idea that none of the game is on that cartridge, which once again is something that has happened elsewhere, but it's fair to be concerned about. But something I want to clarify is these 2 sort of warring ideas of what it means to actually own a game. I think there's a misconception that just because you buy a game physically means you own it more than if you buy it digitally. And in many cases that is true, but it's not universally true. Rather, I would say the actual ownership of a game is when you own and have permanent access to the license for that game, regardless of the state of the game's servers or anything like that. And I'll get into what I mean by that. For a long time, the argument against digital games has been this concept of when you buy a digital game, you're not actually buying the game, you're buying a license to play it. And if you actually read the terms of service, you're not actually buying that license, you're more or less renting it indefinitely. The company that you're buying it from, be it Nintendo or Xbox or PlayStation or Steam, they can take that license away from you at any point, and you just won't have that game anymore. You are buying a game that has built-in DRM, that's digital rights management. Which means, let's say the servers went down and you wanted to play those games entirely offline. And let's say it's a single-player game that you really have no reason to need to connect to a server. Because of the way your license works on any of those platforms, your system will occasionally want to try and connect to that server to just make sure you have this license. And so there will come a point with all of those digital games where you just can't play them anymore because the DRM essentially eats itself. Now that doesn't mean that universally buying a digital game means you don't own it, because there are storefronts like GOG or itch where they do offer DRM-free games. So for example, I bought Wing Commander on GOG. I can take that copy of the game, put it on a USB stick, take it to my friend's house, put it in their computer, and play the game without ever connecting to any online server. Because it's mine. I bought a copy of the game, and I can use it on any device I want. And that was a digital game. But did you see what I was able to do with that digital game? I was able to copy it onto a physical medium and take it somewhere. And that to me is where we actually see ownership of a digital game. Is if I can be completely disconnected from any servers or anything like that and move that game wherever I want. That is owning a game. Even though I didn't buy a physical copy of it, I do own the game. I can make backups of it. I have it. It's mine. In the past, buying a physical game has essentially allowed you to get around all of this because you can take that physical game wherever you want. You can pop it out of your Xbox 360 and put it in a different Xbox 360 because you own it. Great. Good job. But when you buy a keycard, you're downloading a game off the server, so do you actually still own it if you need internet to play it? Well, that's where we sort of get into some misinformation and misunderstanding of how these keycards actually work, so I want to clarify some things. When you buy a Switch 2 game keycard, you put it in your Switch, the first thing it'll do is prompt you to download that game. You do. Great. At which point, you kind of feel like it's just a digital game, right? Here's the difference. If you buy a digital game off the eShop, like I said earlier, it's every so often going to check with Nintendo servers to make sure you actually own the game. So you couldn't buy a game off of the eShop and then leave your Switch in airplane mode forever and just play it indefinitely. At some point, it's going to want to check online to make sure you own it. And that's the key difference for a keycard, is that check it needs to do isn't going online, it's checking for that cartridge. The physical cartridge that you bought. That cartridge is your license, and unlike when you buy a game digitally, where you are essentially renting that license indefinitely, with a physical keycard, you do own the license. So in theory, once the game is downloaded, Nintendo could totally shut down the Switch 2 servers, and as long as you have that keycard, you can keep playing that game indefinitely. You can put your Switch into airplane mode for the rest of its life, and you can keep playing with that keycard. To me, that does imply ownership, because it's offline. Yes, you had to go download it from online first, but I had to do that with the digital DRM free games as well. Now, of course, the catch is that you have to download the game, right? So if you bought one of these keycards in the distant future, long after those servers are dead, it's not going to do you much good because you couldn't get it. But let's say in that future reality that you were able to load from some other source, that keycard would allow you access to the game without jailbreaking anything, because that license would still be valid. You would still own it. It's just a question of whether or not the game files themselves are still accessible. So hypothetically, I could buy a keycard, download a game, put it on my SD card, make a backup of that SD card on my computer, and that game would be safe. Even if Nintendo servers went down, I would have that backup, I would have my license, I own the game. And so this idea that because you are buying a game that isn't on the card completely, you don't own it, is based in this somewhat misinformed concept that physical game ownership and digital game ownership are inherently different. But in reality, either one can be game ownership or not, depending on how it's set up. Because I want to make something very clear that once you download your game keycard game, it doesn't need to go online anymore unless you're obviously playing like an online mode in that game. But if it's a single player game, it's there. You have it. You own the license. This is not the indefinite rental that buying a game off of the eShop is. But before I go, I do have one other thing I want to address. I've heard a lot of people wonder why Nintendo wouldn't just offer multiple sizes of cartridges, so that developers could buy a smaller cartridge and save money, but still put their game on the cartridge if they wanted to. But something I've heard repeatedly from other people I work with at NWR and from game developers is that this isn't really a question of having the perfect cartridge to fit their game. It's a question of whether or not releasing the game physically is cost effective. One of the reasons that all the other platforms went to discs and never really looked back is that CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, they're all very cheap to produce. Cartridges are not. And even the smaller cartridges on the Switch that weren't the maximum size of 32 gigs that system had were still expensive to produce. It's why we saw some developers just buy the smallest gig size and then have you download the rest, essentially making game keycards. Essentially what these keycards are allowing is for a developer to risk as little as possible, but still offer a physical version of their game. And I know that you'll debate the concept of physical, I just did it with quotes. But the alternative, realistically, isn't them putting it on a 64 gig cart and paying that full price and putting that much risk into a physical release. The alternative is them releasing it digitally only, which on Switch means you cannot own it. If a game is eShop exclusive, you are buying an indefinite license to it and you do not own it. If you buy a keycard and download that game, by our definition of ownership, which is being able to play it offline indefinitely, you can make a backup. You own the game because you own a physical license. Now, would I rather the game was on the cartridge so that I could just pop it in and it boots up right away? Of course. Obviously, that's my preferred way to do it. But I can also respect that if you're a developer, or especially maybe an indie developer, who really is risking a lot by spending the money to print physical cartridges, Allowing people to buy the game via a keycard and own it via that keycard is way less of a financial risk than paying out to actually have it on the cartridge. Because once again, the alternative is not that these games would be on a full cartridge. The alternative is just that it would be too much risk and they would only release them digitally. Game keycards are good for game ownership because the alternative is a reality in which you cannot own these games. I know it's a weird concept to accept, but like in reality, that's how it works. This concept that a digital game means you don't own it and a physical game means you do is not completely accurate. There are way more variables than that. And so while game keycards may not be the ideal, they do preserve a way for you to truly own your game while also lowering production costs and lowering risks for publishers, meaning more games releasing physically. I know this sort of goes against the general wisdom that you've likely been seeing on the internet over the past few months, or even years if we go back to this same issue on Xbox and PlayStation, but this is the reality. And I fully expect to be just called a Nintendo apologist for pointing this out, but we have got to separate the physical versus digital argument from the owning your games versus renting your games argument, because they're getting conflated and it leads to these situations. That's all I've got for now. Hopefully, that all made sense. If you do have any thoughts or want to ask me any questions about this, feel free to reach out on your social media platform of choice using the handle on screen. You can also chat with us about this or anything else Nintendo related in our Discord using the link in the description. Check out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more, and I will see you next time. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.